Today I'm going to be using up a box of fresh tomatoes that I picked up at the farmer's market this weekend. I'd like to use our own from our garden, obviously, but our garden is only producing about a handful of cherry tomatoes right now, so for a family of 6, it's just not enough. But we are in the peak of tomato season right now, so if you can get your hands on some at the farmer's market or the grocery store, it is the perfect time to start enjoying them. And so today I'm going to be making a few different things. We're going to do one for now, one for dinner, and one for the freezer. I will leave the recipes that I'm cooking today linked in the description box, so make sure you check that out. And I will also have them linked down below to my blog once I get them up there as well. So I'm going to start by getting out the tomatoes that I'm going to use today for our lunch for the marinated tomatoes. And I think for that I'm going to use about 3 of these bigger tomatoes. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this meal first so that I can get it marinating. So I like to leave my tomatoes on the counter because when you refrigerate tomatoes, I think they tend to lose their nice flavor and texture. So I tend to leave mine on the counter and use them quickly before they have a chance to get any mold spots. For this marinated tomato salad, I started by slicing the tomatoes about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. Okay, so for this amount of tomatoes, I think I'm going to use probably like 1/2 of a medium or small-ish onion, and I'm using a Vidalia onion, which is basically just a sweet onion. So you can use a sweet onion, a yellow onion, even a white or a red. I don't think it matters too much, but Vidalia, when they're in season, they are definitely one of my favorite ones because they're a little bit sweeter than the average, and they just have really good flavor. I just like to finely chop this up so that nobody's getting really huge bites of garlic, unless it was me, because I don't even care. I love garlic so much. I would take a big chunk, but I'm sure my kids would not appreciate that. So just try to mince it up as best you can, or use a garlic press. Those work just as well. I just prefer to do it the old-fashioned way. And now I'm just gonna add these cloves or 2 of garlic. You can kind of use your discretion as to how much your family likes, but my family's not afraid to eat a bunch of garlic, so I'm gonna do about 2 cloves of raw garlic in this. So to dress the tomatoes, I start by sprinkling pink salt over the top, and I do a little bit of pepper, olive oil, and a little white wine vinegar. It's optional, but fresh basil really adds a ton of flavor to this salad. And you could also use fresh thyme, fresh oregano, whatever you have. The tomatoes really take on the flavor of whatever herb you're using, so you can kind of experiment here. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover this up and put this into the fridge for lunch today. The next thing I'm going to make is a homemade tomato soup using fresh tomatoes.
Oh.
Well, Okay, so for the tomato soup, I put our onions in here, and I'm gonna go ahead and put in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, maybe a little more, and then about 4 tablespoons of butter, so that's about half a stick. And I'm just gonna let these onions sweat down for about 10 minutes until they're pretty translucent and nice and soft before I add in our chopped garlic. And I also am going to put in about 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons of salt. So while my onions are sweating down, I'm gonna go ahead and start chopping up these tomatoes. I just like to do them in really big chunks and kind of cut around that hard core. And any brown spots or anything like that, I just kind of throw to the side. We can put that in compost, or you can give it to chickens, or throw it in your garden and just kind of bury it. It's the same thing as composting basically. You're still providing some sort of nutrients to your garden. So I'm just gonna go ahead and chunk these up any which way, it doesn't really matter. And then after our onions sweat down, I'm gonna add these into the pot and let them cook down too. I'm using 8 really large tomatoes. You wanna have around 10, but if they're huge, like some of these are basically the size of my face, so I'm gonna count that as 1.5 tomatoes. So I'm gonna use about 8 today, but in general, use about 10. And of course, you can make this in a double batch or a triple batch and freeze a ton of it for the colder days. So after I got the onions all cooked down, I went ahead and added in my garlic, and I just let that saute for a minute or two. And then I'm going to put in all of my chopped tomatoes. And we're going to put the lid on and let this simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes until they're really soft and broken down. And after the soup is finished cooking, I just pour it into the food processor, and you could use an immersion blender. I actually think that would be the best way to do this, but I don't have one right now, and I need to remember to pick one up before fall comes and I'm making a ton of soups. After I do that, I just put it back on the stove and I added half and half. You could do half and half or heavy cream, either will work. I like to add some fresh basil. This is optional, but I really like the flavor. Then I ladle the soup into my freezer bowl. And I've tried storing soup in glass jars, and I always have issues with cracking once the soup expands. And so I like these stashed bags because they stand up in my freezer, and I don't have to worry about laying them down like the typical freezer bag. And they are actually made from silicone, so it's better for the planet and for our bodies. I'm a huge fan of them. They can go in the microwave, the dishwasher, the oven. So it's super easy to reheat meals, and it's such a practical way to freeze soup. So I'll leave the links below to the bags I'm using. I'm going to go ahead and start preparing my tomatoes for the stuffed tomatoes. And so what I like to do is I'll just take a little paring knife and I'll core the tomato. So I'll cut out the core of it, and then I will take the inside and scrape it out with a spoon, and I'm gonna put the insides, the pulp and everything, into this bowl. And then I'm going to add that into my beef and cheese and spinach mixture that I'm going to use to stuff these tomatoes. fall-like day here, and to be honest, scooping out these scooping out the tomato pulp is kind of making me feel like I'm carving a pumpkin. Once I've cored all the tomatoes, I put them in a baking dish and seasoned them with salt. And then I took the tomato pulp and I drained it. So you want to make sure you get as much water out as you can. And then next I browned ground beef with onions and garlic, and while that's browning, I grated some cheeses to put in the filling. I found a local cheese at the farmer's market this weekend, and it's made with garlic and parsley and chives, so I'm going to use it along with some Parmesan. But if you can't find a cheese with herbs, you can use mozzarella or cheddar. Once the beef is browned, I added a ton of spinach. Then I added about half the cheese to the meat mixture and I stuffed the tomatoes. Then I put the rest of the shredded cheese on the top, and I put this into the oven at 400 degrees for about half an hour or maybe longer until my tomatoes were nice and soft and everything was brown and cheesy. And I finished it with just a little fresh basil again. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me in the kitchen today while we made a bunch of different meals using a simple ingredient like tomatoes. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe so that you can stick around and see my next one. I post one new video every single week. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.